The year is 1886. Theo Van Gogh enters his apartment after a day's work selling art at Goupil, his uncle's art gallery.
Oh, Vincent. Oh, Vincent. Oh, Vincent. Vincent, the mess is everywhere. Oh, it's brushes and paint and canvas. It's just everywhere. I work and I try to keep this place neat and clean, and yet it's just continually a mess. I do wish you would help me. Well, hello. Hello, I did not hear you come in. Welcome to my apartment. Oh, I apologize for the mess. I know you.
Yes, sir.
Yes, welcome. It's so good to see you. Yes, I'm sorry. It's my brother that's the messy one. I must explain that now. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me introduce myself. My name's Theo. Theo Van Gogh. I doubt you've ever heard of me. Oh, my pleasure. But I'll bet you know of my brother, Vincent. Yeah. The whole world knows my brother, Vincent, right? I love your hairstyle.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yes.
I'm a Thomas.
Yes. Yes, the whole world knows my brother, Vincent, but very few people know me, of course, and that's as it should be. But the irony of that is that without me, you probably wouldn't know my brother. Because you see, I supported my brother Vincent throughout his entire art life. He only sold one painting. One. It brought $30 in today's money. It was entitled The Red Vine, and it hangs today in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. So without me, though, with his support, I sent Vincent money every week almost, and brushes and paint, and I really was his supporter. He really was my brother, and I was really his brother. And he wrote me a lot. He wrote me over 800 letters. Yes, over 800 still survive today. Ah, that's right. And that's how we know so much about my brother and the story I'd like to tell you now. And so I get excited. I have to slow down a little because it's a wonderful story. You know, of course, that Vincent's paintings are the most sought-after paintings in the world today. But let me take you back to the beginning, even before Vincent was born. Our father was named Theodore, or Theo, which I was named after him, and he was a minister, a French Huguenot minister. And he was a very cold man, difficult, hard to get to know. And he settled in a little village of Zundert, and he met my mother, whose name was Anna Carbentions. And Anna, my mother, was a fairly well-to-do person. Her father was a bookbinder. And he was so good at what he did that he became bookbinder to the king. Yeah, to the king of Holland. And so she came from a bourgeois family, if you will, and they married and settled in the village of Zundert, some 30 miles south of Amsterdam, where my father had a church there, a French Huguenot church. If French Huguenot was a Christian church, there's only one in America, and it's in Charleston, South Carolina. Maybe you've been there. He liked what he did a lot at the church, but he could never draw people in very much. But my mother, on the other hand, was a very warm, loving person, and she was the social person in the church. And my mother and father decided to have a family, and I guess like most people do today, they wanted a baby to do that with, and so on March the 28th, that's today, March the 28th of 1852, my mother gave birth to a little baby boy, and they named him Vincent Wilhelm van Gogh. Unfortunately, this little baby was born dead. What you today would call a stillbirth. And they buried the little child in a little grave right next to the church, between the church and the parsonage where my mother and father lived. 1 year later, to the day, March the 28th of 1853, my mother gave birth to another little baby boy, and they named him Vincent Wilhelm van Gogh. Now, psychologists or psychiatrists would tell you that a child that's been named by the same name as a child that has just died perhaps would be called or considered a replacement child. They also would tell you that a child that's conceived while the parents are still in mourning may grow up to have difficulties, may have melancholy, they called it. Then today we would probably call it bipolar. He would be a depressed person maybe, or have highs and lows, and my brother certainly did that. Vincent was a very intelligent little boy, and by the age of 5, Mother enrolled him in kindergarten there. And every day, Mother would take him by the hand and walk him to the little school right down by the little grave where the other child was buried. Every day. And every day, without fail, snow, rain, my mother put a flower on the little grave. She did that for over 7 years. Well, what's the first thing a child learns to read in school? His name. And so my brother Vincent saw his name on this little stone there. I don't know that that played a role, but again, psychologists say that it did. I was born in 1857, so I was 4 years younger. Vincent was the oldest of 7 children, 4 girls and 3 boys. Vincent did quite well in school, academically. Socially, he was a terror. And almost every day, Mother would get a letter home from the teacher saying, "We can't control him, we can't manage him, he's unmanageable." And so after the 11th grade, my father decided, no, I'm wrong, after 11 years old, my father decided it was time to make a change. And he enrolled my brother in a school in Tilburg, which was some 30 miles away. I remember the day that Vincent left the home to go there. Father brought the horse and buggy around, and Vincent had his little suitcase, and he climbed on the buggy, and I remember them pulling off down the lane, and Vincent would later tell me that it was the saddest day of his life when he was leaving there. He did quite well in school there. In fact, he completed the school there, which at that time was 11 grades, and was considered a college education. And after that, Vincent took a job with our Uncle Vincent, who owned art stores called Goupil and Company. And he had about 4 of these. And Vincent became a salesman, and he loved it. And you can imagine the art that he was selling. He might have even have sold a Rembrandt, certainly Monet and Pissarro, and it was just wonderful being there. And he did so well that Uncle Vincent came to him and said, "Vincent, you have done so well here. Would you be interested in going to London and doing the shop there for me?" And Vincent said, "Yes, I'd love to do that." And so Vincent left and moved to London, where he became the salesman and the chief manager for the Goupil and Company in London. In London, he found a room to stay in a boarding house. And the lady who owned the boarding house was named Mrs. Lawyers. And Mrs. Lawyers had a daughter. She was about 18 years old. And every day after work, Vincent, and her name was Ursula, and Vincent and Ursula would walk down the river and watch the changing of the guard at the tower. And they would talk about Shakespeare. And they read Uncle Tom's Cabin. And they loved the books, all the books. And so, you know what's coming, I know. But one day Uncle Vincent came to Vincent and he said, "Vincent, you're doing so well here." He said, "I'm going to double your salary today." And Vincent was so excited, and he could not wait to run home to see Ursula. And he ran and he said, "Ursula, I have the best news in the whole world." And Ursula said, "Really? What's that?" He said, "Uncle Vincent doubled my salary today. You know what that means." And Ursula said, "No, I don't know what that means." He said, "Ursula, it means we can be married." And she said, "Married? To you?" And Vincent said, "Yes, I love you, and you love me, and we talk, and we have a wonderful..." She said, "I don't love you. I've never loved you. I'm in love with a sailor who's at sea, and when he comes home at Christmas, I'm going to marry him." It broke my brother's heart. It became a very difficult situation because Vincent was not going to give up. Vincent had found the love of his life, and it became so difficult that Mrs. Lawyers had to call the police to come and pack his stuff and put it on the porch. It was very difficult. And Vincent left, but he didn't want to leave. And he went to the little village of Ramsgate, not far from England, from London, where he taught school for a couple of months. But the other professors there said he was so difficult, just so difficult, and they couldn't manage him either. And so he moved back to Holland, where he moved back in with my mother and father. And it was like this with Vincent and my father. And one day Vincent came to our father and he said, Father, I know now what I want to be. And he said, yes? I said, what's this? He said, I want to be a minister just like you. Well, it pleased my father so much. And I still think that Vincent did this to gain the love of my father, to gain the acceptance of my father, because we all want that, don't we? We need that. But Father made arrangements for him to go to the University of Holland there in Amsterdam to a theological study, which would have been a 4-year course. And he lasted almost 3 weeks before they kicked him out. They too said he was so difficult that no one could get along with him. He said he does not know how to communicate with people. He cannot be a minister. Vincent found his own school, an evangelical school. It was only a 3-month course, and somehow he stuck in there and he completed it. They didn't care for him either. And this little school, in order to complete everything, you had to do a kind of a missionary type work. And so they sent Vincent to a place called the Borinage. It's in Belgium. Perhaps you've heard of it or been there. It's a bleak place because it was the coal mine era. It was where they mined all the coal, and from the dust, all the vegetation had died for miles around. It was in the middle of winter when they sent him. There was snow on the ground. It was a horrible place. And they tried to give Vincent a room in the miner's manager of the mine's home. And Vincent refused. He said, no, I'll live like the other miners. The other miners lived in little grass shacks, little huts, with straw on the floor to sleep on. And the only heat they had was the coal, the leftover coal from the coal mines, and to heat their little stoves. And the children began to work in these coal mines at the age of 6 and 7. And by the age of 11, they were stooped like this so bad that they could not walk upright. Average lifespan was 26 years. Black lung was a horrible thing. For once in his life, Vincent related to these people. He loved these people. He loved helping them, and they loved him. He wanted to be so much like them. He just wanted to be so much like them that every morning when he would get up, the first thing he would do would be to take his hands and rub them in the bottom of his coal bucket and on the sides, and then he would rub it on his face so he would look like them and be like them. Vincent embraced these people. One morning, about 2 o'clock in the morning, there was a terrible explosion in one of the mines. And Vincent got up and went to the door, and the flames were coming out from the mine. And Vincent ran as fast as he could. And there's a lady carrying a little girl about 11 years old, and she was burnt so badly. And Vincent said, let me help you. He said, go to your house and get some rags and some oil, and we will anoint her wounds. And she said, I have no rags. I have no oil. And Vincent took his oil lamp, just like this one, and he extinguished it. And he took his shirt off and took his undershirt off and tore it up. And he put the oil on it and he put it around the little girl's wounds. And he went to the next child and the next and the next until he was virtually unclothed there, helping these children and people. 2 or 3 days later, he was having a memorial service in his little shack for the miners who had died in the mine, and there were many hundreds of them. And people were outside the door, and 2 men came with tall black hats and black suits, and they said, we need to see Mr. Van Gogh. And someone came to see my brother, and he said, there's 2 men here to see you. And they said, Mr. Van Gogh? He said, yes. He said, we came to tell you that you're no longer affiliated with our church. And Vincent said, why? Why? He said, we've heard what you were doing. You were running around naked. He said, I was helping people. I did. No more. And they kicked him out of the church. Once again, my brother's heart was broken. I received a telegram from the manager of the mine, and he said, I think you should come see about your brother. He isn't eating. And I went there. It was in February of 1880. And I found my brother Vincent lying on this little straw mattress, if you could even call it that, freezing, his cheeks sunk in. And I said, Vincent, my brother, what are you doing? You have to get out of here. We have to get you some food. And I left and I went to town and I got some potatoes and some meat, and I came back and I was cooking it and I fed this. And Vincent kind of got up a little bit and he said, Teo, I've had a change of heart. I said, a change of heart? He said, yes. He said, I'm going to become an artist. And he pulled a brown paper bag, just like this, and he said, these are the miners. What do you think? I drew them with just some coal. He said, it's all I had. I don't even have a pencil, but this brown paper and some coal is all I have. And I said, Vincent, if you want to be an artist, I'll support you. I will help you. And Vincent said, yes, that's what I want to do. And I said, then you must study. That's what it will take, is study and hard work. And as I told you, the year was 1880. And I began to send Vincent money at that time. Vincent moved back to Holland into a little village of Noonan. And there in that village, he found a little room to rent. And he would write me and he'd say, Dear Teo, could you possibly send me 17 francs? And could you send me a size 6, 10, and 12 brush? And I need some titanium white and some chrome green. And it's wonderful. And so I would get the money, and then I would go down to Cheap Joe's Art Stuff and get the art supplies. Yeah. You knew there was a catch, didn't you? And I would send them to my brother. And I would get a letter back, and he said, Dear Teo, here is what I've done today. And in almost every letter, a little drawing. You've seen some of the letters, perhaps, that he would always outline for me what he was painting that day. And he said, I've got to have a model. I must draw from the model. And the next letter I got from him, he told me, he said, I have found a model. She's wonderful. Her name is Closina. Her real name was Closina Hornick, but he called her Scene. And I thought, this is wonderful. What I didn't know was that she was an alcoholic and a prostitute. She smoked black cigars. She cursed. And she had a little 11-year-old girl that moved in with my brother Vincent. I'm paying for all this. So I went there to see him, and I said, Vincent, come outside and talk with me. I said, Vincent, you must get rid of her now. You cannot let her and that little girl live in this house. This is unhealthy and not good, and I'm paying for it. And this, he said, I'm already drawing. I'm drawing all the time. And he showed me this little drawing. This is her. This is Closina Hornick. He called her Scene. And here he called her Sorrow. Sorrow. I said, Vincent, this won't work. He said, you take this and you print them and you sell them for 10 cents each. And that will help me to have some income. I knew I couldn't sell them. I knew they would not sell. And I worried because I didn't know whether to not send money or to send money, and we're not quite sure why, but she left him. That says something about my brother, doesn't it? It does. She left him, and he struggled for a while, and he stayed there for a short period of time after that. She later gave birth to a little baby. It's not known today whether that's his child or not, but that possibility certainly is there. He was so broken up over it, though, that he moved back in with my mother and father. And of course, my father's like this with him. But my mother, I told you, is so warm. She took her washer room. She had a little washer room on the house, a little stone room, very small, from here to the wall, square. And she took her washer tubs out of the room and gave them to Vincent for a studio. So now he has his own studio, and he loved it. And every day he would go there and paint, and he would walk out in the fields and sketch and come back and do the paintings that he had worked on in the fields. Next door to my mother and father lived a family of 5 old maids. And they really weren't that old, but they'd never married. And they were called the Bergman sisters. One of them was named Margot Bergman. And almost every day, Margot would come over and she would watch Vincent. Oh, she just loved watching Vincent paint. And this went on for some time. And one day, Vincent, I think, thought, Margot may be the last woman I ever really have a chance to know and to be part of my... And so he asked Margot again. He said, Margot, would you marry me? And Margot said, yes, yes. And she could not wait to run. And she ran home and told her sister, she said, I'm going to be married. And they said, married? Who are you going to marry? And she said, I'm marrying the artist next door, Vincent. And they said, Vincent, the worthless artist? He can't even make a living. He lives with his parents. How can he support you? No, never. You will never marry him. She was heartbroken. That evening, as Vincent was painting in his studio, Margot came over. And she said, Vincent, you just paint. Please don't even look at me. And Vincent began to paint. And in a minute, he heard Margot fall on the floor, and a bottle hit the floor. And he ran to her, and he picked it up, and it was strychnine. Margot had taken strychnine because if she couldn't have Vincent and live with him and love him, she didn't want to live. He picked her up in his arms, and he ran next door with her as fast as he could to the sister's house, and he put her on the couch. And then he turned and left, and they thought, of course, that he had hurt her. But he had gone for the doctor. And he found the doctor and brought him back, and the doctor smelled of Margot's breath and said, has she been drinking wine? And they said, yes, she had wine for dinner. And they said, well, good, because wine is a counteractant to strychnine, and so she probably will live. Well, do not believe that. It is not true. Strychnine will kill you if you take enough, and nothing will counteract it. But she hadn't had enough, and she lived. Vincent wrote and told me, and actually Mother wrote and told me about this incident, and I worried. And so I wrote Vincent, and I said, Vincent, why don't you come to Paris and live with me for a while? 2 days later, Vincent showed up at my front door. I was so glad to see him. He looked good. And he told me then, he said, Teo, he said, I've always wanted to paint from the model. He said, can we go to Corman's studio? I know about it. I said, how do you know about Corman's studio? Oh, he said, everyone, all us artists know about Corman's studio. So I went and made arrangements at Corman's studio for him to go there. And the very next morning, I took him down there. And I paid his fees, and we set him up an easel. And I said, now, Vincent, this evening when you're through, I'll get off from Goupil at 4. I will meet you just out the door to the left. He said, yeah, I'll be there. And Vincent took his easel, and he began to draw and sketch. They had live models there, and this is what Vincent wanted to do. And in a minute, this little fella came in all stooped over like this. And he took the easel next to Vincent, and he began to draw. And he looked over and saw Vincent, and he said, you're new here today. And Vincent said, yes, it's my first day. He said, what is your name? He said, Vincent van Gogh. Oh, he said, are you Teo's brother? He said, yes, you know Teo. He said, yes, we all know Teo. I'm Lautrec, Toulouse-Lautrec. It's so good to meet you. And they shook hands, and they drew. And at the end of the day, they came down to the little sidewalk cafe, and I met them there. And we were having our wine and our hard roll and talking, and Vincent and Toulouse were just friends instantly. And Paul, come back here. Back here. And I said, Vincent, this is Paul Gauguin. I've told you about him. And they shook hands, and it was just an instant friendship. And we had our drinks and things. And so Vincent's art began to soar. He began to try everything. He tried pointillism. He tried Japanese drawings. He loved Japanese prints. Vincent began to have seizures. It was about 1886. And I took Vincent to the doctor, and the doctor says he's epileptic. And the seizures began to be worse and worse, and the doctors suggested hot baths, and they suggested a little alcohol in the evening, and surely to goodness he had more than enough of that. And anyhow, the seizures became so difficult. I thought it was epilepsy also. My friend Toulouse-Lautrec, and Vincent's friend, introduced him to a drink of the day. You already know what it is. It was called absinthe. It comes from the plant Artemisia, or wormwood. It grows anywhere. It'll grow here. They take the root and they extract it, and it formed a white, milky liquid. And when you poured it into wine, in these glasses, and this is the way they did it, they poured it into wine and filtered it because it had particles from the root in it. It turned a kind of a greenish color. And so they called it the green fairy. Green fairy, not the fairy. And it made you crazy. It made you beyond crazy. People killed other people, people committed suicide. But today we know also that it causes seizures. Seizures that exactly mimic epilepsy. So my brother wasn't epileptic at all. He was addicted to absinthe. And it was getting worse and worse, but Paul Gauguin told him one day, he said, Teo, he said, you should go to Arles. He said, in Arles, the light is brilliant. And he said, you can paint all the time. It's like in the South. Go to Arles. I came home that evening and there was a note on the mantel. Dear Teo, I have gone to Arles. I will write you when I get there. With a warm handshake, Vincent. He wrote me right away. He said, I found a room in a hotel, and he said, it's only 7 francs a month. And he said, they have coffee and a roll and a croissant for breakfast. It's only $1, 1.5 francs a month. And he said, if I had a little bit more I do need a shirt or two, and could you send me some more brushes and paint, and I'd like some size 30 and 40 canvases. That's the way canvases were sized then. Today we buy them 12 by 16. Then they were 20, 30, 18, that thing. And so I sent it all to him, and he began to paint. You know some of the paintings he did there. Of course you do. Many, many paintings there, sunflowers, and he painted the Antilles Mountains. He painted the olive trees. He painted the cherry blossoms. Every day he was painting. There they have a strong wind. It's almost like a tornado. It's called a mistral. And when the mistral blows, it blows everything down. And Vincent was out painting one day, and the mistral came through, and it blew his canvas over. And he got dirt on his fresh oil paint. And Rulon the postman came along, delivering mail, and he helped him up, and he said, you're the artist that lives in the hotel, aren't you? Yes, he said, I am, and the wind has just destroyed my canvas. And he said, come, I'll help you. And he said, why do you stay in the hotel? Why don't you live in a house? He says, I can't afford that. He said, I know where there's a house you can rent for 5 francs a month. And he said, it has 2 bedrooms and a little kitchen and a loft and everything. And he said, where is it? So Vincent wrote me and told me. He said, I found this little house. And he said, it's only 5 francs a month, and that saves 2 francs over what we're paying at the hotel. And said, if you could send me the money, I could fix it up, and we could invite Paul Gauguin to come stay with me, and we could form an art school. And so I said, yes, this is a wonderful idea. So I went to Paul Gauguin and I said, Paul, my brother Vincent has this little house and he wants you to come there and live with him. And Paul looked at me and he said, the devil himself couldn't live with your brother. And I said, but Paul, I'll pay for it. I'll pay for the house. I'll pay for your food. I'll send you art. Well, he began to think then, because you see, Paul was having hard times. He was a banker. Paul was a very wealthy banker who had left the Bordeaux area of France to become an artist. And he was having a hard time because Paris, at that time, France, in fact, was under very difficult times, almost a depression. So paintings weren't selling. And so Paul decided to go. And on October the 20th of 1888, Paul Gauguin trucked it down to Arles to meet my brother Vincent. And they met at Vincent met him at the railroad station. It's quite about a 2-day train ride from Paris down there. And it was wonderful. I got a letter the very next day from, really 2 days maybe, from Vincent. And he said, Dear Teo, thank you, thank you, thank you. He said, Paul is here and we're having the most wonderful conversations. He said, we talk about color and we talk about light and we talk about value. And he said, it's marvelous. The next day I got a letter from him. He said, Dear Teo, Paul and I are like 2 charged batteries connected at opposite poles with the sparks flying. He said, he tells me I know nothing of color. All I can do is squeeze pure yellow or pure blue. And he said, it's becoming very irritating. And then I got a letter from Paul saying, I told you I shouldn't have come. But they stuck it for a while. On December the 24th of 1888, my brother Vincent and Paul Gauguin went down to the little sidewalk cafe that they had painted. Vincent, yes, right here it is. This is the sidewalk cafe that my brother Vincent had painted and actually sent this to me to see where they were in Arles. Also, he had done the painting here of the little yellow bedroom. This is in the little yellow house. And he sent this in a letter to Paul Gauguin. And he said, in this you will see two paintings, two portraits above the bed. One is you and one is me. Please come, let's form the art school. And so, of course, Paul did, and as I told you, it was not too good. And on December 24th, Christmas Eve, 1888, they went to this little cafe, and they were having their absinthe. We don't know what the conversation was, but something became angry, and Vincent took his glass and he threw it at Paul, and it hit Paul here and cut him. Paul got up and left and went back to the little yellow house where they were living, and he was packing his clothes. And he would later write and tell me that he could hear Vincent coming up the steps. And the door swung open, and Vincent came in with fire coming from his eyes and a cutthroat razor in his right hand. He said, I packed my clothes and went across the street to the hotel, and the next morning I was awakened by a clamor, and I went down to see what it was, and a policeman got me and said, you're the artist that lives with the Van Gogh, the crazy one. I said, no, I denied it. I don't even know him. I said, why? He said, well, last night he took a straight razor and he cut his ear off. And he cleaned it in turpentine, and he wrapped it in newsprint, and he took it to Rachel, a prostitute at the sidewalk cafe that he had known. Said he passed out from blood going back to his house, and we need to find someone. And so Paul went and found him, and he had cut the jugular vein. It's a wonder he didn't die then. But Paul sent me a telegram, and he said, Dear Teo, I'm leaving, but your brother's here, and I think you better come see about him. And I went, and I found Vincent there on this little hospital bed. And I said, Vincent, what have you done now? Because I knew Vincent had tried to slit his wrist. He had drunk turpentine. I knew he was terribly unhappy. And he said, Teo, it's okay. It's okay. The doctor here tells me that many epileptics cut their ear off. I knew he couldn't go on this way. And so I searched, and I found an insane asylum. It was in Saint Remy. And it was operated by the Catholic Church. It's still there today. It's still an insane asylum. It's still operating. And I made arrangements for my brother to go there, and I took him there. And I left him, and the letters then became very disturbing. He said, tonight I awoke at a lady screaming, and she had taken a knife and was trying to drive it home into her chest. And a man next door howls at the moon like a madman. He said, I cannot take this. I just cannot take it. And he didn't do well, but he painted. One of the most famous paintings he did was the irises, you remember. All of the blue irises and the one white iris. That's Vincent. That's how lonely he was. He's one flower among so many. He didn't do bad, but he didn't do good there. And the letters he was mailing me, they still didn't sound good. And in spite of all my efforts to help him, it wasn't working. And to complicate matters even more, I had fallen in love with a lady named Joanna Bonger. And I married Joanna in 1889. This is her picture up here. And in January of 1890, Joanna gave birth to a little baby boy. And we named him Vincent Wilhelm van Gogh, after my brother. He was so my brother. But you see, this was all a threat to Vincent, because I'm sending him money, and now he sees this money, and I can't send it because I have to have it for Joanna and the little baby. And it was a great threat to him. But I told him, please don't worry about this. But he did. And he continued to deteriorate. And so I met a doctor in Auvers, which is very close to Paris. His name is Dr. Gachet. You know of Dr. Gachet? Yes. This is Dr. Gachet. And this, of course, is a painting that Vincent did of Dr. Gachet 2 days after he went there. Dr. Gachet lived in Auvers, excuse me, very close to Paris. And he had treated quite a few artists in his day. In fact, the first baby that he delivered was that of Monet's wife. And he had treated Pissarro. And he told me, he said, this disease called melancholy is not unusual among artists. And I can help your brother. So I made arrangements for Vincent to go there. And in February of that year, I took him over to Auvergne. Unfortunately, Dr. Gachet didn't have room in his hotel, and so we had to find him a room, and we found a room in an inn, a cafe called Ravo's Cafe. And upstairs, it was a little corner room that you went up a flight of steps this way and this way, and his little room was a little corner room with a cabinet in it where he could keep his painting supplies. And he met Dr. Gachet, and they talked, and he did the painting of him. He wrote to me, and he told me, he said, "You will see from my painting that he's quite as disturbed as I am." But he stayed there, but the letters began to become further and further apart and more disturbing, and things just weren't going well for Vincent, and in spite of everything. And Ravo was trying to help him, and he wrote me a letter one day, and he said, "Dear Teo, I've done a painting that I call Crows Over a Wheat Field. I have that painting back here." And he said, "In it you will have no trouble discerning the darkness that's come into my life." He said, it just won't go away. And then a few days later, I got another letter from him. He said, "I've done another painting of the wheat field, but this time I left out the crows, and I left out those dark, angry skies." And he said, there's a certain peace that has come over me. And you will see it in the latest painting that I've done. On July the 27th, Sunday morning, Vincent got up from his little corner bedroom and came down the steps to Ravo's Cafe. And he said, "Ravo, do you have a revolver or a gun?" And Ravo said, "Yes, I have a gun. Why?" He said, "It's the crows in the wheat field and the blackbirds." He said, "I cannot paint because they disturb me." And he said, "If I had a gun, I could fire it into the air and frighten off the birds." And he said it would make... Well, he said, "Okay." And he went back to the back room, and he got my brother Vincent a pistol and brought it out, and Vincent put it in his coat pocket. He went back up the steps, and he got his palette, his easel, canvas, and he walked up the hill behind Ravo's Cafe, past the church where he had just painted the little church. Thank you. This is the church just behind Ravo's Cafe. And he walked up the hill past this church to the wheat field where he had painted Crows Over a Wheat Field, and where he had painted the gentle blowing of the wheat and the calmness now and the sun, the bright sun. And he got up on the hill and he set his easel up. And he stepped back from it and he put paint on the palette. And he took his brushes. It's as if my brother were going to paint this scene somehow. And he reached in his pocket and he pulled out the revolver and he put it to his chest. And he shot himself. He was so my brother. It did not kill him. The shot did not kill my brother, and he crawled on his hands and knees back to Ravo's Cafe and up the steps to the little room where he was living. And Ravo, the very man who'd given him the gun, found the blood. And he sent me a telegram, and he said, "Dear Teo, you should come immediately." It was Sunday, and telegrams did not run on Sunday then, and so I did not get it until Monday. But I went immediately, as quickly as I could go. And I found my brother in that little room up there, and I went up to him and I said, "Vincent, you're going to be okay." I said, "I've talked to Dr. Gachet, and he tells me if we remove the bullet that you will be okay." And Vincent said, "No, Teo. No, we cannot remove the bullet." I stayed with him all day. And on Tuesday morning, about 2 o'clock in the morning, he rallied up and I said, "Vincent, you could eat maybe a little." And I had some soup fixed. And I sat there on the bed. I put my hand around him on the bed and like this. And he's here. And I was feeding him the soup. And he ate a little bit. And I said, "Vincent, you're going to be fine." And then he said, "I should like to smoke my pipe." And so I got his pipe. You remember the self-portraits with the pipes? And I lit it, and I sat back down with Vincent, and he took a puff or two from the pipe. And I said, Vincent, you're going to be okay. I just know it. And Vincent said, no, Teo. He said, I should like to die like this. I should like to die like this. I think he meant in my arms that way. And with those words, my brother died in my arms. He was so my brother. He was so my brother. Forgive me, please. I went back to Dr. Gachet's house where I tried to rest, but rest would not come. And the next morning, I got up early and went to the church, the little church that Vincent had painted, and made arrangements for Vincent's funeral. And I came back to Dr. Gachet's house, and he said, you must rest, Teo, you must rest. And I took my bed, and I'd been there a very short time, and he came back in, and he said, there's a gentleman to see you at the door. And I went to the door, and it was the priest from the church, and he said, Mr. Van Gogh. I said, yes. He said, we cannot have your brother's funeral. I said, what do you mean you cannot have my brother's funeral? He said, we have learned that your brother took his own life, and we do not have funerals for these people. And I thought, my God, can my brother not find peace even in death? Where is my brother's peace? So I borrowed a horse from Dr. Gachet, and I crossed the Osage River, and I rented a hearse, and I rented a horse. And I had a coffin built from a carpenter. And I came back, and Ravoux said, you may have the ceremony here if you'd like. And so we brought my brother's body in the box, and we put it on a table just like this one with a white tablecloth. And Dr. Gachet brought sunflowers and put them all around it as to form a halo of life. The sunflower, the color of energy and life and sun, and that Vincent loved so much and painted so much. There were only about 5 of us there. Pierre Bonger, my wife's brother, and Pissarro came. Paul Gauguin had already left for the islands. And Dr. Gachet tried to say a few words, but we were all so heartbroken we could not say anything. We took the box and we put it on the wagon that I had rented, and we climbed the hill behind Ravaux's Cafe up by the church that had refused to have his funeral. And we took him to the top of the hill there in the wheat field where he had painted and where he should be painting today. A beautiful, sunny, bright day. And Dr. Gachet put his hand on my shoulder. And he said, Teo, the world will not soon forget the bold forward thrust that your brother gave to art. The world will not soon forget the bold forward thrust that your brother gave to art. We buried him there atop that hill with the wheat blowing, and came back, and I left and went back to Paris to my wife Joanna and little Vincent. But my health failed me. He was so my brother. I couldn't pull it together. And so Joanna took me to a hospital in Amsterdam. And on January the 30th of 1891, 6 months almost to the day after my brother had died, I too died. Followed him to death. And that's the story of my brother, Vincent, and his short life, but what a life. He produced over 3,000 major works of art, thousands of drawings. He suffered, but in spite of the suffering, he continued to produce this art. I must tell you this, that the truth is, you wouldn't know about my brother if it were not for my wife, Joanna. truly would not know. Because you see, Joanna, after I died, came back, and she and little Vincent began to read the letters that my brother had mailed to me. Over 800 of them, I told you. And they weren't postmarked, but because when we would get them, we'd read them and put them in a box, they ended up in chronological order. And as she began to read those letters, she began to realize the depth and the intelligence and the beauty and the love of my brother. And she compiled them into 3 books called The Complete Letters of Vincent van Gogh. They were published in 1914. Published in Dutch originally and then German. And only recently in English. The Complete Letters of Vincent van Gogh. She began to try to have art shows wherever she could. She would have loved this place. She would have loved having a show here with you folks. She would have loved having a show in a cafeteria, in a one-room place anywhere to spread the word. It was not until 1931 in Chicago, Illinois, at the Art Students League, that the first major show of my brother Vincent was held, where the Chicago Daily Tribune would report the next day that people lined up for a mile to see what the crazy artist who had cut his ear off had painted. That was my brother. Little Vincent, my son, grew up to become an architect. In fact, he became quite well, and if you've ever been to Holland, to Amsterdam, you go to the Van Gogh Museum there. He designed that building. Yes, he did not die until 1978. Most of the paintings, believe it or not, are still in possession of the family. And they're a very quiet, secluded family. And that's the story of my brother Vincent and myself and my family. On almost every letter that Vincent wrote to me, he ended it with, "I leave you now," with a warm handshake.